How's it going, everyone? This is Goober from FactionFiles.com with another Red Faction level editor tutorial. Today we're going to go over importing custom textures into the editor for use in your map. We're going to import a wall texture as well as a grading texture so that I can show you how to import textures with alpha and textures without alpha. So before we get started, let's go ahead and make a little map here to show our new textures. So I'm just going to make a 12 by 12 by 4 box here. I'm just going to copy that so that I can make a little hole in the ground over here that we are going to put our grading on top of. And I'm not going to bother making this a face brush. I'm just going to set this as detail. And here we go. So now, all right, now we have our room here. So I'm going to go ahead and import a custom wall texture. It's going to be a cement wall texture for here, and our little brush right here, which is set to detail, is going to have a grading texture put on the top of it so that you're going to be able to see down here when you walk over it. So I am going to be using a couple of textures here from opengameart.org that I found. This is a great website for resources, for level editors, for game designers, for everything like that. Make sure you pay attention to the license of the work that you're downloading. But for this, I went through and I picked out some textures that we're going to use. So I'm going to use this cement wall texture, which I will download. And you can see here earlier I was trying to find textures, so I already had downloaded these files, but anyway, pretend you didn't see that. Anyway, I'm going to use this grading texture right here and that cement wall texture. So I download both of those. Now I'm going to be using Photoshop for the purposes of this this tutorial. Obviously, if you don't have Photoshop, you can use some other graphics editor. This should work no problem with GIMP. It should work no problem with PaintShop Pro. There's a lot of different utilities that you could use. I use Photoshop, so I'll be using Photoshop. So I will deal with the wall texture first, just because that's a bit more simple, and then we'll get into the grading texture. A couple things to consider. First off, you're going to want to check the resolution of your image before you try to import it into the game. You're looking for all of your resolution or all of your dimensions to be resolution values that are a power of 2. This is going to be like 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024. You probably don't want to go any higher than 1024, and in fact, Dash Faction is necessary to properly load textures with a resolution higher than 256, but you still probably shouldn't go super high, because if you do, your map file size is just going to be huge. But anyway, for what we're doing right now, 512 is perfectly fine, so I will keep that way. Now, I'm going to save this texture as a Targa file. Red Faction required for years Targa files. Dash Faction has recently added support for DDS files as well, which you can use if you choose. I'm just going to show you how to do it with Targa, just because this is the way that we've always done it. There's no real reason not to do it this way, unless you're using giant textures, you want to take advantage of compression, those sorts of things. But for simplicity's sake, right now we'll just be using Targas. Now, for the file name here, which is very important, I want to reference a page on the Red Faction wiki. This is a page that I did on the Red Faction wiki, which has all of the Red Faction materials that are available for textures. And you see these prefixes here. We're going to need to prefix our texture file name with this for whatever material we want. This generally affects footstep sounds and bullet impact sounds. Those are the main things. As well, metal specifically. Bullets can ricochet, and some bullets can penetrate through metal texture surfaces, so that's just something to keep in mind. But it's most noticeable when you talk about the sounds when bullets hit it, as well as footstep sounds when a player walks over it. So for our metal grate, obviously, we're going to be using MTL. You could also use steel if you want, but basically everyone uses MTL. And for our cement wall texture, I'm going to be using SEM. It doesn't matter which of these you use. They're all the same thing, so it's personal preference, but I usually try to keep it as accurate to what the texture actually is. So I'm going to use SEM. Another thing to keep in mind with texture file names, you want to keep these as unique as possible, just so that you don't run into a situation where your map has the same texture file name as another map that a player has installed, and then they conflict with each other, and that's just a headache. It can end up making your map or the other map look really, really dumb. So I try to prefix all of mine, my custom textures, with like GBR or like Goober or something like that. You can basically do whatever you want, just try to make it unique. Do not import a texture into the game named like SemWall01. Don't do something like that. It is going to cause you problems, and well, not really you. It's going to cause the people who are playing your map problems. So do them a favor and don't do that. So I'm just going to name this, say, semgbr test wall tutorial 1. Sure, whatever. It doesn't really matter as long as it's unique. Now, I'm going to save this as a 24-bit per pixel targa file. This is important. 24 bits is 8 bits for each of red, green, and blue, which is RGB. 32 bits per pixel would also add 8 bits for alpha. Because this texture does not have any transparency, any alpha at all, we don't need those extra 8 pixels. So we want to make sure that we save as 24 bits per pixel, or sorry, those extra 8 bits. We want to make sure we save as 24 bits per pixel if our texture does not have any alpha at all. So I'm going to save that, and then we're done. Now we're going to go over to our grading texture here. I'm just going to make this a bit bigger so that we can see what we're doing. Now, the very first thing I want to mention with this is something that wasn't relevant with the other texture. This is set to indexed color mode. You're going to want to set this to RGB color mode. That is not always going to be the case. It's actually pretty rare, honestly, that you encounter an indexed color texture. But targa files, especially for Red Faction, have to be RGB color. So you want to make sure you swap that. Otherwise, you may encounter issues trying to save in the right file format and not know why. So just always check to make sure that you're using RGB color when you're trying to convert a texture. Now, the second thing is, obviously, we want to be able to see through the holes in this grading. If I go down to my channel tab right now, you can see I have red, green, and blue channels. I do not have an alpha channel, and an alpha channel is where we get those 8 bits for alpha. That's what we're going to need to be able to see through the holes in this texture in the game and in the editor. So, how do we do that? It's going to depend on the texture. It's not always this easy. In this specific case, the author of this texture made it easy for me because the areas that you should be able to see through are all this gray color. So I can just go up here to select color range, select the gray color. It's just going to select all the holes for me. So it made my job extremely easy. It is not always this simple, believe me. But anyway, we got cut a break here, so we'll take it. Anyway, I'm going to create a new channel here. This process is going to be a little different in the texture editor that you're using if it's not Photoshop. I would suggest, because alpha channels are nothing specific to Photoshop, they're a very general principle in graphics editing and textures. So I would suggest that whatever graphic software you're using, just look up a tutorial on how to do alpha channels, and you can basically follow that in place of what I'm about to do right here. So I'm going to create I already created my alpha channel. Alpha channels are grayscale, and what that means is that white is fully opaque, fully visible. Black is going to, in the game, equate to fully transparent. You're going to be able to see fully through it. In my specific case, I want to be able to see through these holes, and I want to not be able to see through the bars. So because of that, and my alpha channel right now is completely black, I'm going to select inverse because I want to select everything that I didn't just have selected. Paint bucket tool, white, paint bucket, there we go. Now what we have is, in our alpha channel, our bars are all white and our spaces between them are all black. That means I'm going to be able to see through the spaces, not through the bars. As you can see here, it perfectly overlaps. So I'm going to be able to see all the orange, none of the gray. Now that is done, I can go File, Save As. I'm going to save this as a targa as well. I'm going to use the MTL prefix because this is going to be a metal grate texture. Keeping with our naming convention, Goober test grate tutorial 1, save. This I'm going to save as 32 bits per pixel because I want those extra 8 bits per pixel for my alpha channel. I'm going to save that. Now, I can go over into the editor. The first thing I want to mention, obviously, is I'm not going to be able to find my textures in the editor immediately. I need to bring them into my textures folder. The textures folder for Red Faction, and of course, because I was doing this before, I still had them there, so I will delete those so I can show you how it works. The textures folder for Red Faction is in Red Faction /user maps /textures. Multi-single is where you're going to put your levels to play them. Textures is where you put your custom textures to load into the editor. And again, that's the user maps directory inside your root Red Faction directory. So my textures directory here, I'm going to copy my 2 targa files, paste them in right there. Now I'm not actually going to be able to use them in the editor yet because I need to restart the editor. you're not going to be able to load these textures until you restart the editor. So I'm going to close the editor, open back up the editor, and now I should be good to go. So I will open my map, go to texture mode, I will select my 4 walls of my main brush here, go to browse, go to custom textures, and there we go. There is our texture. So I'm going to apply map, and actually my texture is a little too big for this wall, so you don't need to worry about how to do UV unwrapping right now. I'm going to cover that in a future tutorial, but I just wanted to scale that up so that you could see it properly on our wall here. So as you can see, we have our cement wall that we imported from Photoshop straight into the game. Now let's do our grate. So this surface right here is going to be our grate. Browse, select our grate, apply map. Not going to bother UV unwrapping that. Now, because this brush is set to detail, when I just applied a texture to it that has an alpha channel and I rebuild, there you go. Now you're able to see through the holes. This is our alpha channel at work. So I'm going to save this, create a pack file, load up the game. Level texture test 1, I think was what I named it. Yes. Okay. So here is our map, and here is our wall that we imported. Here is our grading. You can hear the cement or the solid impact sound there. It's not on the floor, so I can't show you footstep sound, but anyway, you're hearing the bullet impact sound. This here is the metal grate. It's probably a little quiet, but you can hear metal footstep sounds while I'm walking over this, and you can hear metal impact sounds when I shoot it. And obviously you can see through the holes in it because our alpha texture is working as intended. Anyway, that's a very basic tutorial on how to import custom textures into Red for use in Red Faction custom maps. I hope you learned something in the tutorial. If you did, leave a comment down below, subscribe to my channel. I'd really appreciate it, and you'll get updates whenever I put out new videos. I'd also like to invite you to join the Red Faction community on Discord. There's a link at the bottom of the video. I'll also put one in the description. But we've got an active community of tons of Red Faction fans and level designers. Even about 20 years after the game's released, we've still got an active community going. So I'd like to invite you to join that if you've got any interest in the Red Faction series at all. Anyway, with that, I will see you next time.